Is that the amendment be agreed to? The member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak on the Higher Education Support Amendment response to the Australian Universities Accord Interim Report Bill 2023. Universities are a major part of our economy. They educate our citizens, conduct groundbreaking research, drive innovation and employ many thousands of workers. In my electorate of Canberra, there are 5 universities: the Australian National University, the University of Canberra, the University of New South Wales at the Australian Defence Force Academy, the Australian Catholic University and Charles Sturt University. And UNSW is also building a second campus in Reed, close to the Civic Centre. So I'm not totally certain, but I'd be surprised if there was any other electorate that had more university campuses than mine. In the 2021 census, approximately 4.2% of people in the Canberra electorate were employed in the higher education sector, compared to a national average of 1.3%, which makes higher education the second largest industry of employment in my electorate following the public service. 53% of my constituents have attained a bachelor's degree or above, and 37% of my constituents are currently attending a university to further their education. So I think it's safe to say Canberra is a university town. Unfortunately, however, our university sector is not currently fit for purpose and requires serious reform. And fortunately, we've got a government and a minister who are very much up to and focused on that task. And how refreshing it is to be standing here today talking about the positive changes coming to the university sector, rather than having to defend it and try to draw attention to the attacks from those opposite under the previous government. For a decade, we saw attack after attack, ideologically motivated, on our universities, often because they told the government inconvenient truths. We saw the previous occupiers of the Education Minister's office lodge warfare on the humanities. They picked up and chose the disciplines which would be so lucky not to receive extra funding, but to not have their funding levels cut. Well, we do things differently on the side of the House, and this bill is just one example of that. This bill implements a number of recommendations from the interim report of the Australian Universities Accord panel. And I want to commend the Accord team, consisting of the Chair, Professor Mary O'Kane, AC, Professor Barney Glover, AO, Ms Shamira Wickramaniyaki, my former boss, the Honourable Jenny Macklin, AC, Professor Larissa Brent, AO, and the Honourable Fiona Nash for their work on the review to date. They're all eminently qualified with experience from the university sector, from business and the political sphere. This report outlines a vision for the future of Australia's higher education system and is a significant milestone in the Accord process, which will release its final report at the end of this year. The interim report makes 5 recommendations for priority action, which the government is committed to implement. 2 of those recommendations require legislative amendments, and it is that this bill provides. The first recommendation being addressed in this bill is scrapping the 50% pass rule. The 50% pass rule is a requirement that students must pass 50% of the units they study to remain eligible for a Commonwealth-supported place and fee help assistance. This was a rule introduced under the previous government as part of the Jobs Ready graduate package. Unfortunately, the consequences of this rule have been that students from equity backgrounds have been disproportionately disadvantaged. Unfortunately, our higher education system is inequitable. Opportunity and attainment are influenced by location and student background. Since 2016, participation rates for students from low SES, regional, rural and remote student backgrounds have actually gone backwards. And while First Nations participation has increased, it still languishes at around 40% below non-Indigenous rates. When the Jobs Ready graduate package was introduced, higher student contributions compounded the barriers to education for disadvantaged students, and the 50% pass rule made it even worse. And it doesn't take a genius to work out why. For a student from a low socioeconomic background, consider the need to move out of home to attend university from a regional or rural area to an expensive capital city like Canberra or Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. They might need to work multiple jobs to support their studies. And they don't have the same time to study as their peers who don't have to go to such efforts to support themselves, particularly with costs of living as they are at the moment. And therefore, they don't achieve the same grades as someone from a more privileged background, and they are probably under a great deal of stress. So to have the Commonwealth then say, actually, sorry, you're not trying hard enough and we're going to take away your support, could you imagine that impact on a young person? It makes sense then that this rule has had a serious impact on the equity of enrolment. And more than 13,000 students across 27 universities have been impacted by that rule. Universities across the country have urged us to scrap the rule, and that's exactly what this bill does. Because we should be helping students to succeed, not forcing them to quit because of an arbitrary, punitive rule. Instead of this rule, the government is introducing measures to support students to complete their studies. This bill will introduce for universities a requirement to demonstrate how they will identify students who are struggling and how they will then connect those students with support services to help them. This bill also extends the current demand-driven funding for regional and remote First Nations students to all First Nations students studying bachelor-level courses. The existing measure, which these changes are expanding on, were implemented in 2021 in response to the NAPFINE review of regional, rural and remote education strategy. This measure will aim to directly increase First Nations enrolment. It is a national shame that Indigenous Australians are more likely, young Indigenous men are more likely to end up in prison than to graduate from university. And that's an issue which is a direct result of government policy failures, and this measure will hopefully change that trajectory. This measure means that there will be no cap on the number of First Nations students that can enrol in Commonwealth-supported places. All institutions will receive Commonwealth funding for all Indigenous students. Modelling from the Department of Education estimates that this could double the number of Indigenous students at university over the next decade. There's a lot more to the Accord's interim report than just these issues, and there is plenty to discuss, but there is nowhere near enough time in this speech. But I did just want to briefly talk about some of the incredible work of the universities in my electorate, which I have the privilege of visiting quite regularly. Over at the University of Canberra, I was incredibly fortunate to work there for a number of years before entering this place at the National Centre for Social and Economic Modelling. That centre was instrumental in how we understand the impacts of social policy and economic policy on Australian households. The microsimulation methods developed at NatSem continue to be used by the Commonwealth Treasury and also by other academics in social policy modelling to this day. And the University of Canberra has been ranked as one of the top universities in the country on metrics such as graduate employability and student experience. It ranks as the second best young university in the country and 18th in the world. And this year, the university rose a huge 81 places in the recent QS World University Rankings, an absolutely incredible achievement for a great Canberra institution. At the ANU, just over the bridge from this place, we see some of the most groundbreaking research done anywhere in the world. At the John Curtin School of Medical Research, I recently had the opportunity to launch the Shine Dalgarno Centre for RNA Innovation, 50 years since John Shine and Lynn Dalgarno discovered what became known as the Shine-Dalgarno sequence. That sequence is far too complex for me to understand or try to explain here, but what I can say is that much of what humans know today about molecular biology, about RNA and gene expression, came from right here in Canberra. And obviously, many of us hadn't heard about RNA until the COVID pandemic, and this was key in identifying vaccines. And, you know, a great example of what science means for humanity, that was what gave us comfort and gave us a way through that pandemic. Also at the ANU, I've seen the incredible research the School of Earth Sciences is doing into the extraction of rare earth elements like lithium, which are necessary to fuel the renewable energy revolution. And at the School of Physics, I saw the huge heavy ion accelerator, which attracts researchers from all around the world, including from the CERN accelerator in Switzerland. Also at the School of Physics, I joined Professor Jodie Bradby to smash diamonds together. It sounds fake, but I can assure you that it's true. The end result is a material which has a huge range of applications, including for the construction of solar panels and computer processors. These are just a few examples of the vast amounts of path-breaking, mind-blowing research that are occurring not just here in Canberra but around the nation, thanks to the brilliant academics at our universities. And I would just take this opportunity to say as well that, myself and I'm sure many members of this place, when we have the opportunity to meet with academics at our universities across a whole range of fields, are blown away by the things that they are grappling with day to day, that the problems they are solving, at the innovation that they are driving, and their role in teaching and educating students at our universities who really are the future of this country and the world. So it's always really concerning to hear when you do speak to them about things like job insecurity for some of the brightest minds in our country, and how difficult it can be for academics, often like incredibly highly qualified people, to go from contract to contract, to have, in many cases, sort of unmanageable workloads of marking and other parts of their job. This is something where it really would be good to see a more sustainable support for these academics to get on with what they do best, which is making the discoveries and doing the research and teaching university students around the country. Back when I was working at NatSem all the years ago, I got to author a report which was commissioned by AMP called What Priced the Clever Country? And this looked at what students gained by getting a university education or a vocational TAFE qualification. And what it showed, all the numbers would be obviously vastly out of date by now, but what it showed was that it really was so worthwhile for people to pursue education after school and post-school, and that this would really make such an immense difference to their lifetime incomes. But what it did show as a barrier to students, and as I've talked about, particularly students from rural and regional backgrounds, is that the costs of living as a student are perhaps the biggest barrier to being able to pursue these things. As I've said, moving to our cities like Canberra, they are expensive, rent is expensive, food is expensive. Often people are working multiple jobs to keep themselves able to pursue their studies, often at the cost of their studies, and certainly at the cost of their well-being a lot of the time. I'm not saying, of course, that supporting yourself while studying is something that many students enjoy and want to do, but when it becomes it can become so onerous that you really can't be focusing on the study that you have moved to this city to do. I think that that is something that is to the detriment of the objective, which is actually trying to encourage people to take up these opportunities and the great gains that it has for our future economy and society. So I do feel that the cost of living for students is something that does need to be looked at more closely, and about what we can do to better support students as they do embark on studies, be it in university and also in TAFE. And our fee-free TAFE is a fantastic example of this, and I had the great opportunity to meet with some students from the Canberra Institute of Technology today who were meeting with the Minister Brendan O'Connor and the Prime Minister today, and to hear about the difference that being able to access fee-free TAFE has meant to them. And they were working in a range of they were studying in a range of really priority areas such as early childhood education and cybersecurity, and also in hospitality. And it is so important that people have a range of options when they finish school to pursue these things. So I wish those students the best again. But as I've talked about, this bill also makes it, part of this is supporting students to be able to study while they're at university. I'm so proud to be part of a government that values our university sector and what it can offer for all Australians, and I commend this bill to the House.